Okay, so I think we can start. Is that all right? Cool. So I'm Gabby and this is Amina. And today for our weekly strike, we will be talking about a just recovery. So at FFTO, our mission is to create a safe space for youth to advocate for a better world and for a future that recognizes and implements Indigenous rights, uplifts marginalized voices and communities, and follows principles of climate justice. Find us on Instagram at Fridays for Future TO, Facebook, and you can email us fridaysforfutureto@gmail.com. And please ask us any questions and add comments in the YouTube chat. So our theme for this week's weekly strike are conversations surrounding a recovery from this ongoing pandemic. We've been focusing on an economic recovery, and beyond activist spheres, there's not been a significant amount of discussion in our media. Adaptation to the climate crisis is inevitable. The question is how just the transition will be. This pandemic gives a very loud and clear message. This normal does not work. We don't want normal. We need to rebuild and remake systems.
Well, thank you for that, Gabby. So now we'll be having our land acknowledgement. So we wish to acknowledge this land on which we're holding an online rally. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. You may have noticed that I corrected from people to peoples because there are multiple different groups, and that's something I recently learned, and that's part of the process as you continue to learn and correct yourself. We also acknowledge the privilege of online space that we have today, and the importance of using it to uplift and recognize the struggles that continue today of Indigenous peoples in Turtle Island. So this is something from Fridays for Future, U of T, and it's written by Yako Patton, and it's about what the town of Oka is doing. So they're planning on building a recreation center on sacred Indigenous burial grounds without consulting the Kane Satake community of the Mohawk people, and they are planning on doing an archaeological dig. There's a lack of consultation that is very harmful, and the Mohawk people were not addressed, and it's clear that they're not valued by the mayor of Oka, who found that it wasn't important to consult them in this process. So these acts, or this is also happening in the shadow of, or very similar to the What's What in protests, where there was a lack of it's not just consulting a group, but it's actually listening to their concerns and acting on those concerns and finding a ground where everyone can work. And that clearly does not follow that. So we're going to be sharing 2 links with you. One is for general demands compiled by Fridays for Future U of T, where they're both French and English available, the translations, and also a petition that's advocating for no archaeological digs until there's proper consultation. So remember, this is your time as allies to use your voice to advocate and highlight their work and these petitions, and ensure that proper consultation and action on that consultation happens, and as well as listening to what Indigenous peoples or the Indigenous community there has to say. So please look into it. Please share this petition, sign the petition, and advocate and be there as an ally. So we're going to bring it back a little, and I'm going to ask Gabby a question that she can also ask back to me. And this is something we're doing to kind of also, again, go beyond the normal land acknowledgement, is what intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond this territory acknowledgement? And this also goes to the audience.
So yeah, I think that it is an extremely important topic. We're very grateful for this land acknowledgement, but we can go so much farther for Indigenous people's rights. So I think definitely uplifting Indigenous voices and making them be heard and their demands as well, because we are not giving the same rights that we are giving to other people in Canada. And I think really recognizing our privilege and using it for good is just extremely important. And learning about Indigenous history and the ongoing injustices going on as well is super duper important. And I encourage everybody on here to do so. Amina, same question to you as well.
Yeah, and I think this question, to disrupt and dismantle colonialism, it can sound very overwhelming. And how you address it is through small ways in which you can change the system. And that might be talking to friends or family, or however you wish to go with it. So for me, something that I'm trying to do is what I've noticed with myself, that I've been feeling very tired. Now, it's okay to feel tired, it's okay to take breaks. But it's also, I've been, feeling more quiet on social media. It's harder to talk, it's harder to advocate for certain issues. So I want to challenge myself to set aside maybe more time, or from no time to like 5 minutes a day, um, to restart educating myself and restart sharing those articles or signing more petitions. And instead of someone working very hard in a community having to reach out to everyone, being the first person to step in and listen. So not too much work is needed from that side. But now I'll bring it back to Gabby on what is a just recovery.
Yeah, like we mentioned, our theme this week is a just recovery. So to quote 350.org, they have written a lot about a just recovery and have given many action plans for it. They say, we, the undersigned, call for united global response to this COVID-19 pandemic that ensures a just recovery and transition to a better future for those most in need in wake of this crisis. So 350's demands are: number one, put people's health first, no exceptions. 2, provide economic relief directly to these people. 3, help workers and communities, not corporate executives. Number 4, create resilience for future crises. And 5, build solidarity and community across borders. Don't empower authoritarians. So why is a just recovery important beyond these demands as well? A just recovery is extremely important because it prioritizes the communities which have faced injustices in the past and continue to face them in the present. The choices we make after the COVID-19 pandemic will determine the economic and environmental future for so many people, and then will impact other people a lot more than others as well. So who are we up against? And why is a just recovery so difficult to achieve? Well, some people believe that a problem, if it's not affecting them personally, then it's not a problem at all. Many politicians, both left and right, have not addressed how they will help marginalized groups, in particular to recover from this pandemic, as well as how to approach a just recovery in terms of the climate. Some politicians have made the idea of a just recovery even more difficult during the pandemic as well. For example, Jason Kenney, who implemented the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act in Alberta last month. This bill will negatively impact Indigenous communities, the environment, and people's right to protest, as well as Doug Ford, who has introduced the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act that does not mention helping marginalized communities, and a green recovery as well. We are also up against oil and gas lobbyists who are heavily advocating for recovery that focuses on pouring money into oil subsidies and into exploitative corporations. Sorry. Amina, back to you. We're going to be talking about how this intersects with the environmental crisis.
Yeah, it's definitely very scary. So thank you, Gabby. It's definitely very scary to hear about who we're up against. And some way, we're not going to bring it back as much here, but bring it back to the urgency of the crisis and how it ties to the environmental crisis. Before, and I know when I was growing up, the climate crisis to me was about global warming, and it was about shutting off the lights, and it was about perhaps picking up litter, and I guess that's more to the environmental crisis. And it was a very narrow lens, and that was also because of how it was portrayed in media, in the books that we read, and a general understanding of the problem that did not focus on the people who were being harmed, but rather just I don't know, the science of it, the focus was on the science than the actual impacts on the people. And that was how it was portrayed to me in elementary school and in middle school. And to kind of go back to the roots of where worries kind of come from is the massive amounts of pollution that have been happening for more than 100 years that are threatening our ways of life. And we all know how much we depend on the environment. So we rely on the soil to bring fruits and vegetables and for sustenance. We rely on our skies for water and for the regulation of the climate. We rely on the environment. Now, as we rely on the environment, and as there's an environmental crisis, it's going to harm people. And we also see this from the COVID standpoint, where there's an intersection between the health and the environment. So habitat destruction like deforestation and agricultural development on wildland are increasingly forcing disease-carrying wild animals closer to humans, allowing new strains of infectious diseases to thrive. Scientists say the coronavirus pandemic is the most recent instance of how human degradation of wildlife habitats is linked to the spread of infectious diseases. And this is from an infectious disease researcher at University of Montpellier in France, Roger Frutos. When you cut down trees and remove the forest, you eliminate the natural environment of some of these species, and these species don't disappear. These species, these animals, they move in with their human neighbors who have taken their environment. And that brings on the pandemic, that brings on these diseases, these problems that we're now having to deal with. And it shouldn't be that we keep on coming back to focusing on humans and how our lives are being threatened. We should also focus on other species that we inhabit the nature with. But alongside that, we have to recognize it's not about all humans, it's about certain humans continually exploiting and depriving people from more vulnerable communities to place them in these situations. And until it affects us, we don't raise the alarm bells. We don't really do anything. So we need to challenge this way of thinking. So again, why are we advocating for a just recovery? Why are we, as youth who are concerned about the future, about the future of our environment, planet, why are we still advocating for helping these people, for advocating for marginalized communities? It's because everything intersects, everything causes, everything is interrelated. And that's kind of what we come back to. So another way in which things are interrelated is through food security. And so we've made a link to COVID, and now we're going to make a link between COVID-19, the pandemic, the environmental crisis, and how it's threatening communities and our food security. Things are really interrelated here. So this is all according to World Food Program. So they released a June report. Global food security has been deteriorating in recent years due to conflicts, climate shocks, economic downturns, and desert locusts. Increasing temperatures have also brought desert locusts up through the northern Horn of Africa into Asia and South Asia, and through the Middle East. In addition, the climate crisis has also led to conflicts between farmers over farmland, which has led to political instability in multiple countries. So everything really is related. The COVID-19 pandemic, according to the World Food Program, could drive up the increase in acute hunger over the past 4 years to more than 80%. Additionally, the World Food Program tells us that the economic future for many of these countries looks grim. And as the nature of COVID-19 cases continue to evolve, there are a lot of challenges that poor countries have to face. The World Food Programme also tells us that as of mid-June, 2 out of 3 new confirmed cases are now in low and middle income countries. And while these countries are trying to cope with the fallout of an increasingly severe global economic recession, they're also battling the disease at home. So they're experiencing domestic shocks, and they're also, and part of that is worsening food security. And an example, an IFPRI country study suggests is that Nigeria has experienced a 38% reduction in GDP during the country's 5-week lockdown. This is because many people, their income is hand to mouth. They work, it's by daily wages, and if they get the income for the day, they're able to sustain their living. If not, everything is immediately jeopardized. So this really looks to our privilege as people who don't live in a society like this, but it's also about how our Canada, North America, we're all built on exploitative practices that have put these communities, these countries, the people, the farmers, the people who export or end up, that's where we're getting our food supply from, or that's where we're getting all our non-local foods. They're at risk, and we live off a system where we will be covered for most of the time while they're directly impacted. And lastly, to kind of wrap up this longer part, is that a transition is inevitable. More privileged people with power, they will find a way to ensure that there's always a safe place to sleep for them. They'll find a way to ensure that there will be food on their plates. And the system will continue that exploits migrants' rights, that exploits the people at the bottom, that exploits nature. And if we really want to solve the environmental crisis, if we really want to challenge environmental degradation, we need to work on the very foundations of the system. And that's what brings us back to the just recovery. Because if we are, so to the people listening, to the people who are here as activists, as concerned humans, family members, parents, partners, we need to come together and demand a just way forward so these systems don't continue that, because even if we put a band-aid on it by having countries actively commit to decreasing their carbon emissions, and even if we see that happen, it's likely in some way, in some form, exploitative practices will continue. So this is the link to the report. People can see it. I quoted much of the intro, but you can really look into more of the economic impacts, and it will provide you more information that you might see as being very drastic and sudden. So what is one action you can do, right? And I think it all comes back to holding who represents you, who's representing your voice. Even if you're not, if you aren't able to vote yet, you can still email them, you can still contact them. So you can go on to ourcommons.ca and contact your member of parliament, and you can email them and write like a heartfelt message. You can talk about, don't get too jargony, don't use too many big words. Jargon is another big word. Like write a thank you in the beginning of email, keep it positive. They can easily go to spam, and these emails easily do not get looked at, or they'll be skimmed over. So write something positive because they're more likely to open your email, and then tell them that you want a just recovery. And on that website, you can actually also find clips of exactly what your MP is saying, and just imagine yourself saying it. Just imagine that you're the one who's advocating for that. And if you're not okay with yourself saying it, email your MP, and make sure in the next election you vote for someone who you would be comfortable if you were saying the exact same words they're saying. But yeah, I'll bring it back to Gabby here.
So I think as Amina explained so well, that everything really is connected. Everything really does intersect. And I can completely agree that when I was younger and learning about the climate crisis, I really didn't learn about how specific people were impacted so much more than I was impacted, and how the people in power, the people who represent us, really do make a lot of these decisions. So although small fixes like turning off the lights and recycling is incredible, we also have to learn how to hold our representatives accountable, how to hold our elected officials accountable. And as Amina said, we don't always have to be of age to vote. We can do so much, honestly, without voting, even though voting is extremely important. So like I said, I didn't learn a lot about marginalized communities being directly impacted by by climate crisis, and now with the pandemic. So to talk about environmental racism and a just recovery is extremely important, because as we've noticed in this COVID-19 pandemic, the communities being impacted the most are also being most impacted by the climate crisis. As well as the climate crisis through creating economic and political instability and increase in natural disasters has led to many climate refugees. 25 million people are forced to flee due to disastrous effects of climate change. These refugees are often not accepted by governments, and they have multiple stereotypes placed upon them. And in our Just Recovery, we should advocate for these climate refugees, as well as Indigenous people. They have been subjected to so much environmental racism for so many years in the past, but also ongoing right now. Some most recent examples include the Critical Infrastructure Defense Act, like we mentioned before, Sarnia's Chemical Valley, the St. Clair River, which has 10 tons of pollutants and 100 spills per year, making this a dangerous source of drinking water for the Amjinan and Walpole Island First Nations communities. Mercury contamination in the grassy narrows and E. coli contamination on the catchment reserves leaves so many First Nations people with birth defects, illnesses, and disease. First Nations people who prioritize and care for the earth so deeply in their culture end up suffering from the climate crisis most significantly in Canada. And without a just recovery, these communities will be affected tenfold. Racialized, marginalized communities oftentimes have less resources, more criminalized, and are targeted for environmental waste areas. And our government needs to acknowledge and place importance on environmental racism in this just recovery, and not only prioritizing the climate crisis and solving it, but also really, really placing importance on these marginalized communities who are suffering from it the most, and after the COVID-19 pandemic will suffer the most. And it's very important. So it's definitely important to talk about what we can do about all this. How can we help get a just recovery? So Amina will be talking about that now.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. So the very first thing is, let's do a full circle back to the 350 demands. Take a look at the website again. So we're sending the link again. Take a look at the website, read through the demands. And I'm just going to read through it again. Put people's health first, no exceptions. We're seeing this with long-term care homes. We're seeing this with governments putting essential workers more at risk, or maybe not delivering on the extra wages they were supposed to receive. But people's health are not being put first. And this is part of our environmental advocacy. If we truly want a better world, then we need to put our basic human rights first. Provide economic relief directly to people. This also deals with a lot of accessibility, where certain people are actually end up getting economic relief and help, while many get left behind. Help workers and communities, not corporate executives. Create resilience for future crises, because we're likely to face more. And build solidarity and community across borders. And this goes, if we take a look at it from a global perspective, who is Canada allying with? Which countries are we taking money from? Which countries are we selling weapons to? it all comes back, it's all related. And I know saying it multiple times doesn't help, so it might be something more to reflect on. And this is also a very helpful link from Greenpeace on what are some actions you can take. They start with talking with your family, and you can also write a letter to a newspaper. So those are very simple things you can do. And this will help make a just recovery actually happen. And the last action, or you can also fill out the petition that we mentioned in the beginning, but the last action to bring it all back is reflecting on what your mission is. I know we talked about Fridays for Future Toronto's mission statement, but what is your mission? And it's something I've been thinking about. So you wake up in the morning, what is your mission? Or you might have a to-do list, but overall in life, what sort of, is it about building a better world? Is it about bringing positivity in people's lives? Like, what is your mission? So kind of reflect on that and reflect on what are some things, what's some, when it, when you're reflecting on life, right? What does it all kind of come down to? What are some things in general you want to see happen? And I hope this will kind of guide you into also advocating for a just recovery. Yeah, so now I'll give it to Gabby.
So, as Amna said, these are some really easy things you can do to help us get a just recovery. This is an awesome action plan, so please visit all these links, and I recommend doing at least one of these a day because, like Amna said, really, what is our mission? Do we want to just be silently supporting this, or do you want to be actively supporting this and really helping people? So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you for listening. We encourage you to educate yourself on everything we said because it really is important, even if it doesn't direct you like personally, it will affect you in the long run. And many people's lives will be affected as well without a just recovery. So we encourage you to demand a just recovery from your elected officials and follow all those amazing action steps and help uplift others and fight for our society's economic and environmental rights. So thank you everybody for viewing. It was so great to talk to you, Amina. So bye guys.
Thank you. Bye.